In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist half slave or half free. In the election of 1960, and with the world around us, the question is whether the world will exist half slave or half free, whether it will move in the direction of freedom, in the direction of the road that we are taking, or whether it will move in the direction of slavery. I think it will depend in great measure upon what we do here in the United States.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, 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 Americans.
Accusations. If you've done so much research, you've certainly been in the media a long time enough, instead of doing accusations, you should go ahead and present the facts. You know how to do it, you should do it. Name names, name tales. I mean, I really don't think George Bush is the Superman you make him out to be. And instead of sitting up there saying accusations, why don't you start writing the names and do it? Or are you intimidated too?
Well, if you want to see what I write, I'll be glad to send it to you. You'll have to subscribe to my newsletter for one thing, but I'll tell you right now, George Bush has been with the CIA in spirit since college days. He organized a business about an oil company, which was a CIA front. And George Bush has been a real employee of the CIA all that time, and he is today a man who is among their inner secrets, and he is one of their chief planners.
I know him intimately. I campaigned for him when he first ran for Congress right here in Houston. I put him on the Committee on Ways and Means. Eventually, when I was president, I sent him to China, brought him back, and made him head of CIA.
I thought of this. He is the last surviving member of the Warren Commission. Every other member of that commission has passed on. There's no doubt in your mind it was Lee Oswald acting alone.
Lee Harvey Oswald committed the assassination, and our commission found no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic.
We're out of time. Thank you.
One of the shooters was definitely in the grassy knoll area. There's all kinds of evidence.
We're talking about our government here.
No, we're talking about a crime, Bill, pure and simple. Y'all got to start thinking on a different level like the CIA does. Now, we're through the looking glass here, people. White is black, and black is white.
That the CIA is fighting against drugs. Now, our activities are secret, and accordingly, there is not a lot of public understanding of what we do. I understand that people are suspicious of the CIA.
But you have a private network run by George Bush and Ollie North, not the CIA. You won't find the records in the CIA. They're not there. They're in these privatized intelligence agencies. Will you pursue that? Will you pursue Ollie North and George Bush and the massive documentation?
So we all, I believe, already know this information, Mr. Deutsch. My question to you is, if we know all of this stuff that the agency has done historically, then why certainly should we believe you today when you say, certainly this could never happen in Los Angeles when it's happened all over the world?
Had the CIA worked with the mafia before?
Oh, certainly. The CIA got involved with the mafia in World War II when it was OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, in order to have the help of organized crime in their guerrilla activities in Sicily and Italy. And since then, the CIA has worked with organized crime in the Corsican Brotherhood in France, in running dope from the Middle East. They got involved with it in Southeast Asia, and eventually they got involved with crime in Latin America as well. And this brings them into Castro, because they were working with organized crime, Meyer Lansky, and that part of the mafia in Cuba.
I see.
In the war on drugs, which side is the CIA on?
For years, headlines have been made of the CIA mining harbors, destabilizing governments, plotting assassinations. The history of these covert operations began with the Italian election campaign in 1948. By today's standards, what the CIA did seems almost innocent. Money was secretly channeled to moderate political groups. Demonstrations and rallies were organized on both sides of the Atlantic. Just how influential the new agency's efforts were is debatable. What mattered to the White House was the result.
You're going to be taught to kill, to cheat, to rob, to lie. And everything you learn is moving you toward one objective, just one, that's all. The success of your mission.
And the money poured in.
He loved being Charlie Lucky Luciano, the #1 gangster in town.
He killed his way to the top. When he got there, he laid the foundation of modern organized crime. Behind bars, Lucky not only kept his position as chairman of the mob, but came to the aid of his beloved United States during World War II, greasing the way for U.S. troops invading his native Sicily. The invasion was not only a success for the Allies, but a boon for the local mafia bosses who had followed the instructions sent by Lucky Luciano from prison in New York.
The American generals, captains, were so grateful to the cooperation the mafia gave them that they appointed them mayors of cities, mayors of towns. And so after the landing was successful and Italy was reconquered for the Allies, the mafia was left in a position much more powerful than it had ever been before.
When the war ended, Luciano appealed for leniency. After all, the mob boss had secretly served his country. The government agreed to his release. Lucky fled to Cuba, a mafia paradise.
It was a totally corrupt society run by a dictator who was taking money and bribes from American gangsters to run the casinos there. So it was seen as an open town, Havana, for the mob, so Luciano probably thought he'd be safe there.
Safe enough to call a summit meeting in April 1947 of all his mob associates, both from New York and around the country. It was a huge gathering, including, among others, Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Carlo Gambino, and Frank Costello. Among the crowd of celebrated gangsters was a real-life celebrity named Frank Sinatra.
The nation's most powerful crime fighter, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, denied the very existence of a mafia. All the while, the mafia in America and in New York made billions in cash without Hoover lifting a finger to stop them. Hoover let the mob flourish for over 30 years while ignoring their activities. In New York, the mob had its hand in a large variety of businesses, both legitimate and criminal. They controlled nightclubs and restaurants. They ran gambling rackets and prostitution rings. They controlled all the major unions, including the Teamsters and Longshoremen's Union. They controlled the trucking in the garment district. They controlled the construction industry. And most importantly, they controlled the New York docks. The vast New York waterfront was the lifeline of the city. Goods were shipped in from around the world, and through the Longshoremen's Union, the mob held absolute control over the unloading of these ships. And with the Teamsters Union under its thumb, the mob controlled how these goods were trucked to the rest of the nation. They skimmed millions of dollars from the unions, hijacked or stole millions of dollars in goods from the ships, and set their own prices for the transport of goods throughout the nation.
Probably the main reason why organized crime and the mafia succeeded in America is due to one man. His name is J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover refused to recognize during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, he had to be dragged screaming that there was such a thing as mafia. And he also knew there was a lot of political clout behind the mob. So he stayed away. And in effect, we had no policy until J. Edgar Hoover died.
The assassination of John F. Kennedy is a lingering memory, and for many, an ongoing mystery. Millions still ask, who really killed JFK and why? Theories abound. The latest is a shocker. It places former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in a conspiracy with the mafia to murder the president.
What did you learn, though, that linked Hoover with the mafia with the shooting?
All of the information that pointed to Oswald, the connection to David Ferry, Jack Ruby. These were men known to the FBI, and Oswald's connections, Ferry's connections in...
Do you think they set Oswald up?
I believe they did.
Do you think Oswald did the shooting?
No.
J. Edgar Hoover was a founding father of the FBI. He was the Bureau's director for 5 decades, spanning 8 presidential administrations from Coolidge to Nixon. Hoover became legendary for his leadership against the gangsters of the 1930s and his anti-communist efforts in the 1950s. But he gained notoriety for his enemies list, which included figures such as Martin Luther King Jr.
I'm convinced that it is one of the most unjust wars that has ever been fought in the history of the world.
Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
The FBI director seemed willing to subvert American law to get at people who he suspected of being disloyal.
Keep records on what people said, anything critical about the government, if they were pacifists, if they knew someone who might be a communist.
Hoover writes that he wants to suspend habeas corpus, the centuries-old protection against illegal detention. The U.S. Constitution says habeas cannot be suspended unless there's a rebellion or invasion.